Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. Friends of psychopaths or sociopaths, how did you realize your friend wasn't normal? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. He was very open with it. That guy was genuinely helpful. What he seemed to fear the most was to regress into a helpless person who couldn't fit into society, like the psychopaths that go in and out of jail. So, he made it a habit of a challenge to help at least one person with something every day with no strings attached, friends or strangers, as practice to hold himself accountable. It was a bit weird, and he was kind of weird too, but he was open about it in advance so that he'd have a harder time screwing us over if ever he had a relapse in willpower. It was definitely a bit of an ego thing, I think. He liked the role of being a nice, friendly person who overcame his shortcomings. I hope he really did. I know his motivation was a bit unusual, but I've never met someone as helpful as that guy. He wasn't afraid of anything. He'd do dangerous stuff like remove wasps' nests from neighbors' porch as casually as he'd help an old lady carry her groceries to her car. Cool dude with some crazy stories. We were in high school. I finally called her out for manipulating and bullying people into being her friend, including me, after she had told the whole school I was pregnant. I wasn't. And as this was a very small, very religious school, it took a good amount of effort to dissolve those rumors. In retaliation, she accused my mother of slapping her when she came to our house to apologize. For many reasons, this was absolutely false. My parents and I decided I would move schools the next semester to remove us from her. My first day of school, she came running up to me grinning, going on an excited tangent about she had told her mother she wanted to switch schools too, so she could be with me. It took me another 2 years and intervention from the school after my mother and I built up a good amount of evidence for her to finally be told if she didn't leave me alone, she would have consequences. We were going to go to the police accusing her for stalking and harassment. That threat was enough to finally get her mother to agree to have her leave me alone. Prior to that, she was insistent that we were best friends and her daughter never did anything wrong. When a story starts with the words, "There were many red flags," it's usually going to be pretty juicy. There were a lot of red flags. He was definitely closeted bi, which is fine, but his behavior wasn't. The main red flag is that he had a slew of ruined relationships in his wake. He was a college theater professor and had a pattern of behavior in which he would identify young men in the department who were emotionally vulnerable, often who'd had recent girl troubles and or had no current male role model or father figure. Many of them had issues with their dads or their dads were deceased. He would then start spending time with them and love bombing them until they thought they were his best friend. He fed on adoration. I don't even think he exploited all these guys for sex, though he probably did some. He just got off on people adoring him. When they started showing interest in other people, he'd go hard on the discard. There was a pattern of subtly putting these guys down and then building them up so they were conditioned to please him. If he got bored, he threw them aside. He once told me he viewed all his interactions with people through a caricature he created of them. For example, a black friend of ours was the loud black woman. Another friend who'd lost his dad recently and suffering severe depression was Eeyore. He was incapable of self-reflection. If he knew he'd upset you, he'd apologize, but it was always empty. He could not reflect on his actions and actually accept accountability for wrongdoing. He was a budding alcoholic and would attend lectures and rehearsals drunk, then laugh about it later like it was some kind of inside joke. He was a liar. The man was pushing 40, trying to convince these college-aged men he was in his late 20s, so they'd hang out with him. He didn't care about your boundaries. At his house, he'd regularly expose himself as a joke and acted confused when I didn't find it funny. As one of these guys he loved bombed and emotionally manipulated, I eventually wised up and realized that my relationship with him was not healthy, and that it was not acceptable for him to have the emotional relationship he was having with his effing 19 to 20-year-old students. I cut ties, and he went from love bombing to resentment so fast. Later on, my wife and I were visiting some friends who were also friends with him. They'd known him longer than we ever did, and let him stay in their guest house for months when he lost his living arrangements during COVID. They eventually kicked him out and cut ties too. Then, they told us they had recently run into a former high school classmate of his who said, "I'm so glad you got away from him. There's something wrong with him. He's dangerous." When I, age 21, 1989, walked into the hallway in our shared house and saw him playing the electric piano, He had a photo of the girl he'd been dating in front of him and was badly playing mournful-sounding music. Bad breakup, I said. And he explained to me in careful detail how she had accused him of being a feelingless monster because he was unmoved by some minor tragedy. I forgot precisely what. He proceeded to tell me she was right. He didn't care and couldn't make himself. He didn't take joy in the other person's suffering, he just wasn't moved. So the piano and photo were an attempt to fit in with the rest of you. See, if I'm doing this, I'm acting like a person with feelings, and people will like me better. I did the 1989 version of Weird Flex, but okay. And he evidently decided that meant I was cool with his lack of feelings, and he'd come to me every week or so with some situation coming up in his life and ask me how I thought a person with feelings would react. He eventually got pretty good at this. He called it putting on the human mask. People he met after this generally accepted him as a functioning human. We've been friends ever since. He's very successful as a financial manager of some kind because emotion doesn't enter into his decisions. He's married, has a couple of cute kids, who he sees as mostly gibbering animals, but sometimes they think his wife seems happy, but he rescued her from some really toxic situation, so she might figure she's better off, and to the best of my knowledge, she has no idea his humanity is a mask. He still talks to me every time her birthday or their anniversary or Christmas comes near and runs gift suggestions by me. He's totally intelligent enough to see the stock cliche gifts are the wrong choice, but doesn't have the perspective to be able to put himself in his wife's shoes and see what she'd want. I'm pretty good at it, judging from the reaction she has to his gifts. I had a friend who always seemed a little off or low empathy, but I ignored a lot of the sides. She was a destructive party girl with a weirdly hostile relationship with her mom, as in she was regularly hostile to her, and I noticed she could be a bit of a bully and thought of people as below her. I was a pretty vulnerable teen who always struggled making friends, so I tried to brush that stuff off because she was cool with me. There was a point where she got super drunk, slept with my boyfriend, and they called me together to mock me about it. It was humiliating, like peak embarrassment. What's even more wild is the week after, she approached me as if nothing was wrong, and it was all just a bit of fun. I knew she was a bad person when she called me, but I knew she had something deeply wrong with her when she had no self-awareness about the fact that an action like that would make me not want to be her friend. She seemed genuinely surprised that I was pushing her away. I've had some updates about her from mutual friends, and it sounds like this is a pattern she continues to repeat in her adult life as well. She really treats everyone in her life like a disposable amusement, and she's not smart enough to mask and manipulate them. Everything she does is extremely blunt, and she doesn't seem to ever really care or register that it is hurtful. Losing friends also doesn't seem to bother her. She's never like, "How dare you be mad at me?" She just doesn't get why people are so sensitive. My adopted mother is a psychopath/sociopath. I first realized when I was around 8 that she didn't have normal emotions and could be unusually cruel when other people weren't around, and appeared to take great pleasure in being cruel to me. As I got older, I realized that her facial expressions were learned by rote and she could instantly switch smiles and other expressions on and off at will. Several of my friends commented on this oddity and how she seemed cold all the time, even when smiling and being nice. When I injured myself as a child, if it wasn't a clear, open wound with blood, she would often ignore it. I hobbled around on a dislocated knee for an entire weekend, and it was only when I couldn't make the walk to school she eventually took me to the hospital, where she calmly lied about how long it had been dislocated. When I screamed as the doc and nurse popped my kneecap back, she yelled at me for being weak. When there was a girl in the next bed with a clearly broken arm, she just couldn't empathize with anything not obvious. She was an egotist, too. She would often one-up me as a child. I had and still have an exceptional memory, so she told me she could remember everything, even being born. Anything I was good at, she claimed to be better at. I was a very artistic child and was reading well above my age, but of course, she told me she had beaten me at every one of my achievements. This was all before the age of 10. I'm pretty certain she deliberately killed our elderly cat when she couldn't be bothered looking after him anymore. She owned dogs and would discipline them into obedience with obsessive and cruel levels of control. In hindsight, she also did this to me. Punishments as a child for being naughty were wildly excessive, often violent, but always psychologically damaging. She would say I was acting like a baby for crying, then dress me as a baby. I was over the age of 9 here, and pretend she couldn't understand what I was saying because babies can't talk. In my teenage years, when we lived on farms with guns, I was constantly terrified she would shoot me if she ever had a plausible reason to do so, that it was a convincing accident. I spent a lot of time in my room. I didn't have a 16th birthday. I think she forgot and then manufactured me being naughty as an excuse for it. She threatened to divorce my dad over my gender issues to punish me. I thought constantly about running away from home, and she knew it. She told me that if I did, I should do it naked, because she bought everything I owned and it would be theft if I took anything with me. She also progressively isolated our family further and further away from the rest of our relatives and made us dependent on her. We lived deeply rural, where I had no money and no chance to get away from her and live with other relatives. She strictly controlled how much I saw my very few friends, and I had to plan a month in advance for any sleepover kind of arrangement, and there were strict rules about it. I was never allowed birthday parties with friends. Even at my father's funeral, that light switch smile turned on and off when convenient. You would see her remember that she was supposed to be grieving and instantly change expressions. It was quite terrifying. I suspect my father's suicide wasn't truly suicide. We were friends with him and his sister. We later realized when we could only see anger in him and pretty much nothing else, that was the first flag. One of the friends started dating the sister, and he came to us one day and told us that our friend has taken him aside and told him that if his sister was hurt, he would have no problem hurting him in turn. Our friend was terrified because he truly believed him. That was our second red flag. The final one was when his family got T-boned at an intersection and his dad and sister were killed. Mom in the hospital for observation, and him in there as well with some broken bones. He didn't seem to care at all when some buddies went to see him. The hospital was a teaching one with psychiatrists, and all one came to see if he wanted help while he was there, and he basically asked, "Why would I need help?" Mom agreed to a formal evaluation, and he was confirmed psychopathic. His mom basically committed the rest of her life to make sure he could function in society, taught him what societal right and wrong was and laws governing behavior and stuff.
And you thought you had a bad boss? That's a pretty good one.
I used to work for a sociopath. At first he was incredibly nice. I honestly thought he was the best boss I ever had. He overpaid me, gave me lots of time off, and showered me with occasional gifts. There were many experiences along the way where his behavior was obviously questionable. At work, he had a habit of sending me into unsafe situations and not realizing that my well-being would be at risk. When an employee left for another job, he acted like they were pet goldfish that could be flushed down the toilet and replaced. I recall one occasion where I merely mentioned to him of an experience where a former coworker and I visited a local distillery to grab a drink after work. My boss went on a tirade about that employee being unreliable, and my boss repeated the notion that he knew he wasn't a long-term fit in the company. Keep in mind, my boss hired him. There were two final straws with my boss. The first occurred when he took me out for lunch one day and threw a temper tantrum at me in public. The second took place in a one-on-one meeting. He brought a knife and used it to intimidate me, to force me to do what he wanted. It's pretty big. He yelled at me because my nephew didn't want to watch a movie with his kids. My nephew is 2, and he's scared of the dark. The kids were using a projector instead of a regular TV, so the room had to be dark. Every time the door would close, my nephew would freak out, so I decided to keep him with me. My friend started flipping out, screaming at me, and threatening to spank one of his kids, who did nothing wrong. He started yelling at his wife also. He has 5 kids, mostly girls. The oldest girl tried giving him snacks to make him feel comfortable and offered to sit next to him, but my nephew was too afraid. It felt like she was trying to help him because the safety of her siblings depended on it. I didn't know what to do other than leave with my nephew so the girls wouldn't get in trouble. I tried calling social services, but there's no proof that the girls are being harmed or neglected, so they're still with him. I'm afraid for the girls and his wife. Think he's suffering a mental collapse because his mom died from cancer. His mother abused him. He's become very harsh with the women in his life, including me. My husband doesn't want me back over there without him. I've been trying to convince their mother to take the kids and leave, but she won't listen. I'm only able to reach her through Facebook. She uses her daughter's school tablet to reach me. She can only contact me when he leaves the house. He takes all the phones when he leaves. She's not allowed to leave the house, have friends, or have company while she's away. He doesn't let his wife buy clothes or do her hair. She's always calling me to cry and complain about how he's treating her, but she won't do anything. I defend them all when I'm there, but I try not to because he treats them worst after I leave. I feel helpless. I don't know what to do. If I was wealthy, I'd buy her a house and move them far away where he can no longer scare them. I feel so helpless. Keep trying. My uncle is a sociopath. That side of the family is messed up, so no one noticed for a long time that he wasn't normal. Took myself and my father as outsiders to finally realize he was completely incapable of real emotion. He just faked it, and faked it well. I could go on and on with stories. The final straw with us was when my father went to work for him. Took a good year before he realized my entire uncle's business was a scam and possible outright fraud. This was pre-internet, so word of mouth got around really slow back then, and so much money was basically stolen. Think of a massive Ponzi scheme. He eventually delivered on his promise, but took 2 to 3 more suckers to get there. Eventually, regulators came down on him. He lost wife number 2. Turned out all her money was tied to his business, and her parents' money all gone. We cut ties from him as well. Nothing was his fault. If you challenged him, he turned on you fast. He's on wife number 3 now. From what we see via Facebook and some family still in contact, he tries one get-rich scheme after another. His online life is full of complete lies. Wife number 3 is also successful, and he just leeches off of her. The frustrating part is, if you, dear Reddit user, were to meet him in person, you would like him, believe his stories completely, and ask us why we were so mean to him. Yes, this has happened before. I have an ex that there was something seriously wrong with. I know everyone says that about their ex, but this was very different. He wasn't at all malicious, but he had no regard for other people at all whatsoever. And he was extremely charming and skilled at lying, highly intelligent. I didn't realize the extent of it until a while after we broke up. I was extremely shocked when he drugged his grandmother so that he could steal her car. Well, he never seems to do anything for the sake of hurting people alone. He doesn't seem to derive any satisfaction from the act of causing harm. He's not like Ted Bundy or anything, but if that person is between him and whatever it is that he wants, he has no problem with doing whatever he needs to do to eliminate the problem. He only ever surrounds himself with people who are useful. If they aren't useful, he has utterly no interest in them. I can't prove they were, but I'm pretty convinced an old friend was. Haven't spoken in ages, thankfully. For starters, he had a complete inability to feel any remorse for his actions. He could coldly drop people from his life for the smallest infractions by emotionally abusing to the girls he dated, say or do damn near anything without thinking anything of it. And while I don't think I ever remember him sharing any personal details, I do remember how his eyes used to light up if people started getting personal about their lives or insecurities or anything, like he was recording and filling that info away for later in case he needed to use it. Watching them actually obliterate someone's whole life over a petty disagreement, like pathologically lying and one by one turning people away from someone and then outright admitting to orchestrating the whole thing because they disagreed on a political issue, not a race or a sexuality involved political issue either. At that point, everyone was just scared that they'd turn on them. Another one, I just have to remind how emotions work every once in a while. He's genuinely a good dude, but can be pretty scary on occasion. Think Dexter. Completely able to lead a normal life, but out of tune with people's emotions and how he should react to them.
The woman described in this story seems hyper-intelligent, and I hope she gets the help that she may very well need.
My little sister, 27 years old, recently was diagnosed as a sociopath. Growing up, we always suspected she couldn't comprehend empathy. For example, as a young child, she would get bothered by the sound of someone's breathing and attempt to stop them breathing so she could enjoy silence. The only thing that mattered to her was her own comfort and validation, and she didn't seem to understand anyone else wanted the same. She kept mostly silent her entire childhood and just observed and absorbed all human behaviors around her so she could mimic them. That resulted in her being able to manipulate everyone she comes in contact with. She lived off my parents until she tried to burn the house down as a punishment for them offending her, told her to register the car they bought her, because she equates a personal affront to burning them alive in their home. She currently is living off an asexual guy she's convinced to be her caretaker because sex is an annoying distraction she doesn't want to be bothered with. I love her to death, but it's difficult dealing with her and all the different versions of her other people know. She's a chameleon, and it gets her what she wants, but I wonder how lonely it is to never have anyone truly know you. I was in kindergarten, and my mom worked at my school providing support for kids with behavioral problems. My best friend was this charming, sweet boy who was always really nice to me, if maybe a little quiet when other kids would come hang out with us. I never realized there was anything wrong with him, frankly. My mom, however, knew that he had bad writing problems. He had been caught torturing animals, and he was in therapy for talking about setting his house on fire while his family slept. She put me in a new school because she was so afraid he would become fixated on me if she tried to stop us from being friends. She's worked with a lot of kids with a wide variety of shitty situations, but she says that kid is the only one who ever actually frightened her for his total lack of humanity. He was able to put on a very convincing act, but he didn't really care about anything.